Welcome to the debate. So picture the scene. You're in a boat. You're just pushing off from the shore of Dalmanutha. You are suspended between a miracle you just witnessed and a destination you haven't reached yet. And there are 13 men in this vessel. And in the storage hold, there's just this singular, almost pathetic object that becomes a center of a crisis, one loaf of bread.
It's a very claustrophobic setting, yeah. And what happens in that boat is, in my view, it's one of the most raw and relatable moments in the entire text. You have what is essentially a supply chain failure. They forgot to go to the market, colliding with a very high-stakes theological warning.
Relatable is a generous word. I'd call it a diagnosis. We're looking at Mark chapter 8. The disciples realize they've got only one loaf. They start to panic, discussing this lack among themselves. And at that exact moment, Jesus issues a warning. He says, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod."
And the wires just cross immediately. Jesus is speaking in high metaphor about spiritual corruption. And the disciples, they're thinking in the most literal terms about their empty stomachs. They think he's scolding them for forgetting lunch.
Which brings us right to the central tension for today. We have a group of men who have twice witnessed the miraculous multiplication of food for thousands. Yet, faced with a single loaf, they spiral into anxiety. So the question we're debating is this. Is this anxiety a hardening of heart, a spiritual failure to perceive reality? Or is it, as you're sort of apologizing for, a necessary human anchor that reveals the limitations of our own minds?
Okay, I reject the term apologist. I'm looking at the anthropology of the scene. I argue that the anxiety over the one loaf is a natural cognitive response to scarcity. I believe the hardness of heart described here isn't rebellion. It's more of a slow dullness that comes from being in survival mode.
And I represent the position that this anxiety is a fundamental failure of perception. It is effectively functional atheism in the presence of God. By obsessing over the lack, the disciples are showing a blindness that really threatens to undo their entire discipleship.
Functional atheism, wow. You're starting with the heavy artillery right out of the gate.
The text demands it, so let's look at my opening position. The source material it's ruthless here. Jesus doesn't offer them a hug, he offers a rebuke. He asks, "Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear?" Now, this is not the language of comfort. This is the language used elsewhere for idols, for things that have sensory organs but zero perception. My argument is that the disciples are engaging in toxic thinking. They're allowing the immediate small worry to completely obliterate the massive empirical evidence they've just lived through. They are choosing to live in a universe of scarcity while sitting next to the source of all abundance.
See, you frame it as a choice. I would frame it as a constraint. Let's look at the human context for a second. My position is that this anxiety is not a rejection of God, but it's a symptom of the process. Jesus asks, "Do you not yet understand?" That little word "yet" implies a trajectory. You can't just, switch off the survival instinct. When you're in a boat and you're hungry, that one loaf is a hard physical fact, and it screams a lot louder than a theological memory.
But that scream is exactly what must be silenced.
Is it? Or is it the context for the lesson? If they had brought a full catering service, Jesus' warning about leaven would have been just some abstract lecture. The hunger grounds the metaphor. I'd argue that hardness of heart here can stem from distraction, from busyness, from the sheer cognitive load of trying to keep 13 men alive. They're not Pharisees. They're not Herod. They're just guys who forgot the shopping.
Just guys who forgot the shopping. That really minimizes the stakes. If we stay on the surface, sure, it's a grocery error. But the text explicitly links their discussion of bread to the condition of their hearts. And that brings us to our first core point of debate, the nature of this hardness of heart.
Okay, let's define our terms, because I think you're reading hardness as wickedness.
No, I'm reading hardness as impenetrability. The Greek concept here suggests a callus, a sclerosis. The text says they were discussing the lack of bread, and Jesus interrupts to ask, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive? Are your hearts hardened?" He draws a straight line between their logistical anxiety and their spiritual condition. A hardened heart in this context is one that just can't absorb data.
it bounces off. They have seen the 5,000 fed, they have seen the 4,000 fed, but that data didn't penetrate. It didn't change their operating system. They're still running on the scarcity version 1.0 software.
I accept sclerosis, but I challenge the cause. You seem to imply they are willfully blocking the truth. I'd argue the blockage is, well, it's physiological and psychological. Think about the scarcity mindset. Modern psychology tells us that when the brain is focused on a lack of resources, money, time, food, your fluid intelligence actually drops. Your peripheral vision vanishes. You get tunnel vision on the problem.
But you're applying modern psychology to excuse what the text calls a spiritual danger.
I'm using it to explain the mechanism. The source says, quote, "Physical sight does not guarantee spiritual understanding." Why? Because physical sight is overwhelming. That one loaf is sitting right there, staring at them. It's a tangible symbol of their failure, and it blocks their view of the divine. That isn't malice. It's just the limitation of being trapped in time and space.
But the rebuke suggests they should be able to overcome that limitation. If the scarcity mindset is a valid excuse, then Jesus is unjust for rebuking them, but he does rebuke them. He expects them to be able to look at the one loaf and see it through the lens of the 5,000. He expects their spiritual memory to override their physical panic. By reducing the situation to a math problem, 13 men minus food equals disaster, they're reducing God to a bystander.
Well, they're reducing God to a passenger, which technically he is.
He is the captain of the reality they are inhabiting. That distinction matters. And this leads right to the second point, which I think dismantles your innocent confusion defense. We have to talk about the math.
Ah, the quiz. It's my favorite part of the dialogue because it's so pedestrian.
It is empirical. Jesus doesn't just say, "Trust me, I'm magic." He says, "Let's review the data." He asks them specifically, "When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" They say 12. Then the 4,000, they say 7.
It's a pop quiz in the middle of a crisis.
It's the scientific method applied to faith. The source notes that forgetfulness weakens faith. But look at the precision. 12 baskets, 7 baskets. These aren't random numbers. 12 usually symbolizes the tribes of Israel. 7 symbolizes the Gentile nations or completeness. He provided for the Jews, he provided for the Gentiles. The leftovers exceeded the original supply. My position is that faith isn't some warm feeling in your chest. Faith is the logical result of remembering data.
The numeracy of faith, it's a cold way to view a relationship.
It is a stable way to view a relationship. If they simply applied the logic of the data, that he creates surplus out of lack, then the one loaf in the boat becomes completely irrelevant. The anxiety is a failure of logic as much as it is a failure of trust.
I agree that memory is strategic. I do. However, I'd argue that the gap between the miracle and the memory is where the human experience actually lives. You ask, why don't they remember? And I answer, because the context shifted. Standing in a grassy field with a huge crowd feels very different than bobbing on a lake with no exit.
But the provider is the same.
The pressure is different, though. And notice Jesus's method. He has to literally drag the memory out of them. Do you not remember? He has to actively prompt the recall. This suggests that the memory isn't automatic. It's dormant. And my argument is that the anxiety over the one loaf is the very trigger that makes the memory necessary. If they had plenty of bread, they wouldn't be thinking about the baskets at all. The crisis creates the friction required to light the fire of memory.
You're making the anxiety sound useful.
It is useful. It exposes the gap. It shows them that they don't trust him yet. You can't fix a crack in the foundation until the house settles and reveals it. The one loaf reveals the crack.
I worry that your interpretation allows us to stay in that anxiety for too long, calling it part of the process. And that is dangerous because of the other thing in the boat, the leaven. And this is my third point. We have to discuss the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod.
This is probably the most misunderstood part of the entire text.
It's the key to the whole passage. Jesus warns them against leaven. Now, in the ancient world, leaven wasn't some packet of instant yeast. It was a piece of old fermented dough kept from the previous batch. It contained the bacterial culture. And if that culture was bad, it ruined the new batch. It represents an influence that is pervasive, invisible, and systemic.
Agreed.
For Jesus warns them, beware the influence of the Pharisees and Herod. And what is that influence? Well, the Pharisees represent religious performance, self-righteousness, the constant demand for signs. Herod represents political power, cynicism, self-preservation. Both of these systems operate on the premise that man must secure his own existence.
Okay. And how does that connect to the bread they forgot?
This is the crucial link. The disciples are anxious because they think their survival depends on their own ability to procure bread. That is the leaven of Herod. We are alone. We have to fix this. We didn't buy bread, so we will starve. They are adopting the worldview of the godless systems around them, a worldview of scarcity and self-reliance. By engaging in that anxiety, they are allowing the leaven to work through the dough of their hearts.
That is a brilliant theological connect the dots, I'll give you that. But look at the text. When Jesus says leaven, they don't think political cynicism, they think sandwich.
Which just proves their density.
No, it proves their innocence. They're so literal-minded. They are not sitting there thinking, oh, we must embrace the political philosophy of Herod. They're thinking, oh no, he knows we went to the wrong bakery. They're confusing a metaphor for a menu. I argue that you're accusing them of spiritual corruption when they are merely guilty of linguistic confusion.
But linguistic confusion is spiritual corruption when the speaker is the Word of God. If you cannot distinguish between the bread of heaven and a loaf of sourdough, you have a problem.
Oris, you just have a stomach. I mean, my position is that guarding the interior life is critical, yes. We shouldn't let the cynicism of the world, the leaven, infect us. But it is incredibly difficult to distinguish between I am being cynical like Herod and I am genuinely worried about how to pay my mortgage, or in this case, how to feed the crew. You're asking for a very high level of introspection and a moment of panic.
I am asking for vision. Having eyes, do you not see? He isn't asking them to be philosophers. He is asking them to be witnesses. Witnesses to what they have already seen. If you let the leaven of worry take over, you eventually become Herod cynical, protecting your own little kingdom, unable to see God.
I just think the text shows they're nowhere near being Herod. Herod wanted to kill Jesus. The disciples just want to eat dinner with him. They're flawed, yes, but their confusion is a stumbling block, not a barricade.
We may have to agree to disagree on the severity of that confusion, but this leads to the climax of the whole argument. The one loaf.
Ah, the irony of the object itself.
Exactly. The text emphasizes they had one loaf with them in the boat. But early commentators in the source material all point out the double meaning. Who else is in the boat? Jesus, the bread of life, the one loaf that is broken for the world.
It's a literary masterpiece, really. They're fighting over the symbol while sitting right on top of the reality.
Which is why the anxiety is such an insult. This is my strongest argument. The greatest misunderstanding is forgetting who is in the boat. Their security was never the supply chain. It was his presence. If you are sitting next to the creator of matter and you are worried about matter, you have lost your mind. You are acting as if he's absent when he is right there.
I concede the theology. Circumstances may fluctuate, but God's presence does not. It is absolutely true. But
Here it comes, the but.
But seeing miracles is not the same as understanding them. The source notes that even those closest to him needed time. You want them to instantly deduce that because he is there, caloric intake is irrelevant? But I'd argue that the anxiety over the one loaf serves as a necessary human anchor.
Explain anchor, because to me, it looks more like a dead weight.
Well, an anchor holds you in a specific place. The anxiety holds them in the place of need. If they had remembered the bread, if they had 12 loaves, they'd be self-sufficient. They would be eating, joking, probably ignoring Jesus entirely. They'd be comfortable. And comfort is so often the enemy of revelation. The lack, the embarrassing failure of their supply chain, it strips away their self-sufficiency. It forces them to look at him. And even if they're looking at him with confusion, at least they're looking at him.
So you're saying the emptiness of the pantry highlights the fullness of the Christ.
Precisely. You can't learn that he is the provider until you are in need of provision. The anxiety is the classroom.
That is a compelling way to reframe failure. It is. But I have to push back. The source asks us, are we focused on the loaf or on the Lord? It presents it as a binary choice.
My fear is that by validating the anxiety as a classroom, we get comfortable in the back row. We excuse our lack of trust as just being human.
And I worry that by labeling the anxiety as toxic, we shame the person who is already drowning. We can't skip the step of being human. The disciples eventually get it, but they don't get it in the boat. They get it after the resurrection. The boat is just one step on the journey.
But we must not stay in the boat. The source material calls for deliberate remembrance. That implies effort. We have to fight the biological impulse to panic. We have to, in a sense, weaponize the memory of the 12 baskets against the reality of the one loaf.
Weaponize the memory. I like that. That acknowledges the conflict.
It is a conflict. It's a war for the mind.
So let's bring this to land. We've got the one loaf, the symbol of lack, and yet the symbol of Christ. We have the leaven, the invisible infection of distrust, and we have the baskets, the data of past grace.
And we have the listeners who are likely in their own version of the boat right now. Facing a deficit, a bill they can't pay, a diagnosis, a one-loaf situation.
My conclusion remains firm. The source material is a call to higher ground. It warned us that small worries can blind us to greater realities. If you focus on the loaf, you will succumb to the leaven. You will become cynical. You have to actively, strategically, and deliberately remember what God has done in the past to survive the present. You have to do the math of faith. And my conclusion remains grounded in the timeline. Understanding unfolds gradually. Feeling anxiety is not the end of your faith. In many ways, it's the beginning of your question. As long as you remain in the boat, and as long as you keep answering Jesus when he quizzes you, you are moving in the right direction. You don't have to be perfect in your perception to be safe in his presence.
There is one bridge between us, though. The source mentions something that it changes the whole tone of the rebuke.
It is not merely rebuke, it is invitation.
Yes. When Jesus asks, "Do you not yet understand?" he isn't firing them. He isn't throwing them overboard for being slow.
He's inviting them to look again, to just wipe the fog off the lens.
Exactly. He is challenging them to upgrade their operating system from scarcity to abundance.
So whether you view the anxiety as a sin to be repented of, or a weakness to be surrendered,
The remedy is the same. Look at the one in the boat, not the bread in the box.
even when the box is empty.
Especially when the box is empty.
We'll leave you with the question that just hangs there over the water. Do you not yet understand?
A question that takes a lifetime to answer.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We hope this conversation helps you navigate your own shortages this week.
Until next time.